Shalom. The title of today's Shavuot study is Will You Go Up? And some of the material you may have seen before with a slightly different focus. Will you go up? It's a short study on Shavuot. The calendar controversy in a Second Temple period context. As you are certainly aware, the majority of Nazarenes or Messianics are not celebrating Shavuot today. They plan to celebrate it next Yom Rishon or Sunday. What you may not know is that this practice follows the understanding of the Sadducees or Tzaddukim and its modern-day heirs, the logic of the Karaite sect of Judaism. Karaite Judaism, of course, holds that Shavuot or Pentecost always comes on a Yom Rishon or a Sunday. Hence, they, the Sadducees and the Karaites, believe that the original historical Shavuot, when God met with the 70 elders of Israel on Mount Sinai, was on Yom Rishon. The reason is that calculating the correct date of Shavuot depends on counting the 50 days, which start in the day after the Sabbath, as most translations read. And they believe this Sabbath to be the weekly Sabbath, and that Sabbath always means the seventh day of the week. That's what the word Sabbath means, with the exception of when the Scripture calls Yom Kippur a Sabbath. That's the calendar controversy. Yet this Messianic or majority view today, this majority view calendar in the Messianic sense, was not the practice during the Second Temple period, during the time that before and after the resurrection, and during the time of the writing of the Gospels, and importantly, the book of Acts. This was not the Messianic majority view of today was not the practice during the Second Temple period. Taking a look at some history, here's what Josephus writes. Josephus, of course, the Jewish historian from the Second Temple period. He wrote, "But on the second day of unleavened bread, which is the 16th day of the month, they first partake of the fruits of the earth, for before that day they do not touch them." Elsewhere, Josephus tells us that the Sadducees, when they were in authority, had to adopt the doctrines of the Pharisees due to the popularity of those views, their own views here being held by only a rich and well-off few. What this means, and in terms of what Josephus' writings mean, is that during the Second Temple period, it was the Pharisaic determination of first fruits that the temple operated, which would be on the first day after, or should be the day after the first fruits, or the day after the beginning of unleavened bread, which would have been on the 16th of the month of Aviv or Nisan. So at dark after Aviv Nisan 15, even if it was now Sabbath, they would reap the omer in order for it to be waved at dawn in the temple on the 16th. And the grain offering was placed on the altar until the following dawn. And so during the Second Temple period, the 50-day count started on the day the omer of barley was waved, which was on the 16th of Aviv or Nisan, which would not necessarily on the day after a Sabbath, but the day after the first day of unleavened bread. Why is this important? Well, how you count the omer in terms of starting it determines when you celebrate Shavuot, or the Feast of Weeks, also known as Pentecost. The Ruach's Shavuot seal. So let's reread what happened when the day of Shavuot had fully come. This is from the Complete Jewish Bible, Acts 2, 1-4. The festival of Shavuot arrived, and the believers all gathered together in one place. Suddenly there came a sound from the sky like the roar of a violent wind, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting. Then they saw what looked like tongues of fire, which separated and came to rest on each one of them. They were all filled with the Ruach HaKodesh and began to talk in different languages as the Spirit enabled them to speak. So to comment, the converts or the exiles that we'll read about later in this chapter would have been associated with the Pharisees, because they are the only ones, of course, who made converts. By coming on Shavuot to the temple, when they're in the house, the Ruach HaKodesh confirmed their counting method, since we know this date when the Ruach came was really Shavuot. What we saw from Josephus is that during the Second Temple period, the Sabbath reference in Vayikra or Leviticus 23:11 is to the first day of unleavened bread, i.e. that Sabbath, quote unquote, is always Aviv or Nisan 15. Here's a translation from Leviticus 23:11, and he shall wave the sheaf before Yahweh to be accepted for you. On the morrow after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. So the Sabbath reference is understood to be the first day of unleavened bread by Josephus, and how it was carried out during the Second Temple period. Well, some Messianics who defend the Karaite view of counting and Karaite interpretation against this historical method that was practiced during the Second Temple period have scolded me, saying, you shouldn't always follow the rabbis. Well, we absolutely agree with that statement. We agree that a follower of Yeshua should not always follow the rabbis. However, there is a corollary, how you should neither also follow or always follow the Sadducees nor the Karaites. And just because it is a majority opinion within modern-day Messianic or Nazarene Judaism, we shouldn't always incline after the majority. In fact, I think it's a bit pejorative to refer to the Second Temple period's practice of Omer counting as the rabbinic view, as many actually do within the Messianic movement. The understanding that Sabbath in the Hebrew text of Leviticus or Vayikra 23:11 refers to the first day of unleavened bread actually predates the rabbis, it predates the Pharisees, it predates the first Hanukkah and the entire Maccabean revolt. So it really is anachronistic to refer to this method of counting as the rabbinic view. And what evidence is it that this historical method of counting predates Hanukkah? Well, it comes to us from the Greek Septuagint translation. You'll sometimes see that abbreviated as LXX for 70, for the 70 Jewish scholars that translated the Septuagint from the Hebrew into Greek in the city of Alexandria, Egypt. Septuagint was the first translation of the Torah into a foreign language, that we know of at least, and the 5 books of Torah translation were made about the year 250 before the Common Era. Before the Common Era, sometimes it would be 250 BC. And here's where we can find that evidence. It's in the translation itself, where we see where it says in 23:11, this is 23:11 from the Septuagint, the Hebrew text here reads Mimacharat HaShabbat, but the Septuagint translates the Sabbath in that text as protos, or the first day of unleavened bread. So the understanding from 250 BCE is that Sabbath in Leviticus 23:11 refers to protos, or the first day of unleavened bread. Where the Hebrew, as you said, saw earlier, would be translated as from the tomorrow of the Sabbath, the Septuagint refers to it as the first day of unleavened bread. What this shows is that the Septuagint translator regarded 23:11 as referring to the annual Sabbath, and he also regarded the Greek for the Sabbath to here refer to the same ton sabbaton, or the Sabbath. So the context is that the Sabbath was interpreted as referring to a singular annual Sabbath, which would be the first day of unleavened bread, and not to the weekly Sabbath as interpreted by the most modern day Messianics, the Sadducees, and the Karaite sect of Judaism. There is some other ancient evidence, of course, besides the Septuagint. The Aramaic Targumim also referred to it as the first day of unleavened bread. As we saw earlier, Josephus said that as well. Josephus, to recap, Josephus told us that the Sadducees, when they were in power, had to adopt the doctrines of the Pharisees due to the popularity of those views, and their own views were only held by a few rich and well-off people. So back to the question, will you go up? If you held the Sadducean view of the calendar, but were in Jerusalem when the events of Acts 2 unfolded, would you go up to the temple even if you thought it was the wrong day for Shavuot? Would you let the Ruach HaKodesh guide you? Would you go up? Will you go up? I pray that our answer is yes. We know that the Ruach HaKodesh will not tell us to violate Torah, and we need to be attentive to the Ruach's leading and guiding. And this is not just about a so-called calendar controversy, but about the troubling times that may be ahead. Next year in Jerusalem, Shalom.